Hey, this is Mrs. Reichelt. In this next video, we're going to go ahead and talk about hematopoiesis. So our last video, we left off on this slide, and it's basically showing how the stem cells differentiate to form white blood cells, different types of white blood cells, platelets, as well as erythrocytes, or those red blood cells. So it is important to know that these stem cells are not like the typical embryonic stem cell we think of. Those ones are able to differentiate into any different type of specialized cell. These stem cells are only able to differentiate into different types of blood cells. So that means that we have the hemocytoblast, which will differentiate into the lymphoid or the myeloid stem cells, and then the myeloid then will go to basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, monocytes, platelets, or erythrocytes. So there's definitely a lot more on this side, whereas the lymphoid stem cells will differentiate into lymphocytes. As we form new erythrocytes or red blood cells, basically what we'll find is that red blood cells, if you remember from a couple of videos ago, those red blood cells do not have a nucleus. Because they don't have a nucleus, they're unable to grow or divide. So they end up wearing out. Cells don't last forever. They have to have a source of being able to reproduce. Because they don't have a nucleus, they're not able to go through mitosis, so they wear out between 100 and 120 days. What happens then is the spleen or the liver is going to destroy those worn out red blood cells. So as they notice that those red blood cells aren't carrying enough oxygen, or they're not doing their job really effectively, then they're basically taken care of by the spleen or the liver. The lost cells are replaced by the hemocytoblast in the red bone marrow. What controls that red bone marrow and production of red blood cells is this erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is a hormone, and the kidneys produce that erythropoietin. What the kidneys do is basically, so if this is your kidney, the kidneys, as fluids are being filtered through the kidneys, there's going to be a sensor for red blood cells and oxygen levels. If the oxygen level is really low, then the kidney is going to send the message to the red bone marrow using erythropoietin, saying, oh, go ahead and produce some more red blood cells now. Homeostasis is then maintained by negative feedback from blood oxygen levels. So we talked about the oxygen examples. If there's a high number of oxygen as they're being filtered through the kidneys, if the kidneys realize that, oh, there's lots of oxygen here, then they will not be producing more erythropoietin to, in turn, make more red blood cells. So basically, you start out with, you have the normal oxygen levels. Once you have an imbalance happening, then all of a sudden you know that the stimulus is the decreased red blood cell count. It could also be a decreased amount of oxygen as well. Once you have those reduced levels in the blood, the kidneys, as I told you before, they're going to release the erythropoietin. Then the erythropoietin is going to travel into the red bone marrow. So inside the medullary cavity, there's going to be red bone marrow there. The erythropoietin stimulates that red bone marrow. And then after that, it's going to produce more red blood cells from the hemocytoblast. Ultimately, that'll increase the oxygen carrying ability of the blood. And then you'll be back into balance. All right, so that's basically how red blood cells are going to be produced. The formation of white blood cells and platelets are also controlled by hormones. We have some colony stimulating factors, sometimes we call them CSFs, and interleukins. They're going to prompt bone marrow to generate leukocytes. So if you are fighting an infection or something, you'll have more leukocytes or lymphocytes or neutrophils or whatever type of specialized blood cell you need. And then you have thrombopoietin, which stimulates the production of platelets. Thrombopoietin is going to be in response to bleeding or hemostasis, the stoppage of blood flow. And that wraps up our video. Hope you found that helpful.